Well, hello everyone. Back again for my weekly message. This past week was, in many ways, it was not a great week for COVID-19. A number of states have been reaching new highs. Michigan has been doing well, and is still, comparatively speaking, with other states, doing very well. It's got bumped out of the top 10 in terms of the number of cases of COVID-19, so that's a good thing. But cases have been rising, and particularly that's over the past week, but particularly so over this weekend. And so, we've got to really continue to be vigilant and make sure that this doesn't take off. Now, why is it rising? Well, there's speculation on a few things. One is the migrant farm population is particularly susceptible to getting COVID-19 because of their work and living conditions, and so that seems to be one probability actually. Bars opening and people congregating around bars. I think you may have heard last week there was a bar in Lansing in which either 76 or 79 people were confirmed to have contracted COVID-19 from that bar on a single weekend. So that's certainly another probability, and some action needs to be taken there. And then it's really hard to know for sure, but common sense would tell you that many of the protests around, particularly in the Detroit area, where you have thousands of people congregating, some without masks, it's certainly hard to social distance in a protest environment, that perhaps there may have been some cause from that. Now let me be very clear. I'm glad the protests went on in many ways, because I think the voices needed to be heard, and I think these protests are having an impact on American society now. That's important. But I do think from a public health standpoint that there's a possibility that we've gotten some infections as a result of people congregating. This week, coming up, I'm going to be announcing a committee. It's going to be called the Social Action Justice Committee. You'll hear more about it probably on Tuesday or Wednesday, so I won't get into a lot of detail about it, but suffice to say that we as a university really need to look at ourselves and make sure that we identify all forms of bias, whether it's implicit or explicit, and try to eliminate it. And that's what this committee is going to be about. More on that later. I want to conclude with the way I always do, which is to talk about my latest novel, or the latest book that I read. I mentioned to you last week that I was starting Guy Stern's book, Invisible Ink, and I've just finished it last night, and I do recommend reading it. A couple of things. Even the name Invisible Ink, you wonder, well, why is that? Well, a guy heard early on in childhood that he should not stand out, that he needs to blend in, because standing out in Nazi Germany meant that you were identified and sometimes exterminated. But one thing that I'm always, and Jacqueline and I talk about this a lot, the one thing about the Jewish population is that they really never let you forget the atrocities that occurred in the Holocaust. Whether it's through books or movies, you see it all the time. And I think that it is so important to continue to tell the story, expose what happened, because this is one of the tragedies of modern history, or near modern history. The other one, of course, being slavery. And on that note, I mentioned last week I read Michelle Riley's book on post-war slavery and the burdens that African Americans continue to carry. And The thing about both these books, which I find very compelling, is that they're both true, obviously, but both of them probably would not be told, the stories will probably not be told were it not for something like University Press. Neither one of these books are going to be, I'll sell a Stephen King novel. But they are so incredibly important, one on the experience of African Americans and one on the experience of the Jewish population. On a final note on Invisible Ink, the other thing that I find so fascinating about this book is that Guy Stern is 98 years old and he's still active. This book was published in 2020, so he had to have written it, fairly recently. His memory is unbelievable. I will admit it's better than mine, even at my age. I can't even imagine having that kind of memory at 98. And that's the other reason that I thought book was worthwhile. I learned a lot about Wayne State. He was vice president here, and I look forward to meeting him, if possible, very soon. Thank you very much, and Warrior Strong.